Okay, so let's try this one. The Guardians of Childhood. This is said to be book 5, but it's the first one I could get. And I'm going to read a chapter and we'll see what you think about it. Jack Frost, the end, becomes the beginning. So, these are the Guardians. Let's take a look at them so we can take a look at their pictures. Okay. So, this is the Man in the Moon. This is Nicholas St. North. The Easter Bunmund. Queen Toothfairy. The Sandman. Catherine. Oh, we know a Catherine, don't we? Our heroes and villains. We have Catherine, Mother Goose. We have Jackson Overland Frost. We have Twinner, Pitch, Emily Jane, Mother Nature. So, Chapter 1. A nose is nearly nipped. Christmas Eve was Jack's favorite day of the year, and for the last few decades or so, he had spent that day in his favorite place, his tree. Jack's tree was the oldest in Central Park. 1,000 people, maybe more, walked past it daily, and had done so for many years, but none of them knew that Jackson Overland Frost was very often living inside it. The tree was much older than the park. The tree was much older than the park it stood in, and it was, even older than the city of New York. City of New York itself. It was a sapling when the city was still called New Amsterdam, and there were more Native Americans than settlers living in the swampy forest of Manhattan Island. By this Christmas Eve, 1933, millions of people lived within shouting distance of this noble oak, but its secrets were still more absolute than they had been when the flintlocks or bows and arrows were the order of the day. A heavy snow is falling all over the east. It muffled the sounds of the city through New York. It muffled the sounds of the city, though New York was already quieting down. People had finished shopping and they were heading to their apartments and penthouses and homes. Jack, however, could feel the thrum of excitement from the children. Sleep would be difficult for them. It was, after all, Christmas Eve. A busy night for Sandman, he thought. The inside of Jack's tree contained more than a dozen rooms within its majestic hollow, and the furnishings were a mix of pieces from several centuries: spears, shields, stools, and pottery from the various tribe of the Iroquois, along with colonial tables, ornate chairs, and couches brought over from Europe. There was a tomahawk from a chief of the Algonquins. The jacket that George Washington had worn the night he crossed the Delaware was hanging on a hat rack that had belonged to Teddy Roosevelt. This tree, like all the tree houses Jack called home, was a handsome, comfortable clutter of the region's history. Jack was ready to meet up with the other guardians when he felt the dull, worrying ache in his left hand. He wanted to ignore it. He knew Nicholas St. North would already be grumbling about his being late. Jack Frost, the fair weather guardian, North would playfully gripe, comes and goes where he pleases. The word, my dear North, is, oh, the word, my dear North, is pleases, Aster Benimond would correct. Go lay an egg, Gerald Rabbit, Bunny North would retort, and they would begin to amicably argue. Jack could imagine it exactly. He grabbed his staff, Twiner, and prepared to leave, but then he paused as another, even sharper pain seared through his hand. He looked at his palm at the curious scar etched across it. The inky stain of Pitch's blood had discolored it, and it was, Jack knew, the source of the pain, for it only twinged was Pitch or his forces posed a threat. He turned back to a cabinet well hidden where he kept his daggers. There were several similar daggers in this secret cabinet. All of them were made from large, sharp, single diamonds, and each gemstone had been formed from the tears of someone Jack had loved. As far back as his earliest days as Nightlight, Jack had possessed the ability to turn sorrow into a weapon. These daggers could only be used against dark forces or to protect the kind and weak. But there was one other dagger unfinished that was different from the others. It had come from the tears of Pitch himself. This dagger had one purpose only. Jack never completed its construction, but he knew now in his heart that it was finally time to use it. And this worried him deeply as he took the dagger and tucked it into its sheath. He slipped on his blue hoodie, which he wore as sort of a uniform, and then set out for the pole, the North Pole. The thousands or so squirrels that sheltered in his tree were eating nuts and singing squirrel carols around a squirrel version of a Christmas tree, a cone-shaped mound of acorns covered with candles. They squealed, "Merry Christmas," to him in a squirrel squeak. Jack squealed back, and he spoke fluent squirrel and chipmunk. As he leapt out of the hollow, he felt his hand throb once more. Not now, not tonight, he gave his hand a shake. A breeze suddenly kicked up. The trees swayed and lurched, their message clear. Danger was near. Twiner instantly transformed into a bowl and a quiver full of gnarled arrows. Into a bow and a quiver full of gnarled arrows. Jack quickly knocked an arrow. "Where?" he whispered to the bow. He let Twiner lead him to where he needed to aim. While Jack could sense danger, Twiner could always see where it was coming from. The wind stilled and the snow stopped. Not only do the trees know there's danger, so does Mother Nature. Jack squinted through the trees and spotted something flying through the air toward him. Nightmare men, and they were coming fast, but before Jack could shoot, he heard a telltale sound that made him tense up. The quick, sharp rip of arrows in the air. The limbs closest to him shook and bent faster than seemed possible, forming a shield. Bark and wood took the heavy hits, stopping more than 24 dark arrows in mid-flight. One struck less than an inch from Jack's head. The arrows were most unusual, black as coal with an oily sheen. He had seen arrows like these back when he had been called Nightlight. These were the very type used in the last great battle against Pitch. The Battle of Bright Night. They came from the dark side of the moon. He pulled his bow tight and whispered, "Seek!" and let the arrow fly. It splintered into a multitude of shafts, and in the distance he heard a rat-tat-tat-tat of the thud of each arrow found its mark. Silence followed. The snow began to fall again. Mother Nature signaled that the danger had been dealt with. The distance he could just barely hear carolers. They were singing God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. It was one of his favorites. He looked more closely at the arrow that had nearly killed him. Jack Frost nearly had his nose nipped, he said to Twinner. And then he leapt into the air and flew off into the night sky toward the North Pole with a new urgency. He knew these arrows meant that Pitch was somehow enacting a long festering plan of vengeance. This Christmas would mean the return of the Nightmare King. Oh my, we're going to let that go with chapter 1.